or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour, I will be reading from Sunday, June 28th, issue of the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In big headlines, America is a country that never stands still. Since the Declaration of Independence was sent to King George 250 years ago, our nation has been a restless improvisation, a citizenry shaped by immigration, war, economic, and cultural upheavals. For the country's 250th birthday, we asked Times opinion columnists and writers to pluck a moment from this complicated history. What are the accomplishments, the movements, and ideas that continue to inspire us? What represents this country at its best? Here are 16 nominations for America's highlight reel. This was written by Thomas Friedman, our unofficial anthem. It was in Florida on Super Bowl Sunday this year, and drove to my friend's home to watch the game. I was late in setting out, so I put the pregame show on the radio and was still in the car when Brandi Carlile sang America the Beautiful. I am a huge Carly fan, and since I was alone, I quietly sang along, which may explain why, for the first time, I was suddenly struck by the concluding verse. And crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. What does that mean, I ask myself, to crown the good with brotherhood? Catherine Lee Bates, who wrote the poem that the song is based on, seemed to be saying that the reward for acting good was brotherhood. What an interesting formulation. Brotherhood for her was the greatest achievement of all, not good. Doing good was the means, but brotherhood was the crowning goal. As soon as I got to my friend's house, I searched the internet for explanations. Bates wrote the original poem in 1893 at a time when the United States was grappling with intense industrialization, urbanization, and the scars of the Civil War. A flawed Reconstruction had left the country deeply divided. Our national brotherhood was not a given then at all. It is not surprising that she was extolling brotherhood as an ideal. Still, I found many different interpretations. One suggested that Bates was acknowledging America's good, its natural beauty, its resources, its patriotic dreams, but suggesting that these qualities, while noble, were incomplete on their own. The crown was brotherhood or national unity. Without the national unity, the good is just a collection of individual virtues or riches without a shared purpose. You can have amber waves of grain and alabaster cities, but if the people within them are divided, those assets won't last or will just become more things to fight over. By placing brotherhood above good, Bates seemed to be saying that with brotherhood, everything is possible. Without it, nothing good is sustainable. Another interpretation was that Bates meant good as a moral statement, and the true reward for good behavior and social trust required to generate it is brotherhood and national unity. Either way, I found her elevation of brotherhood inspiring, and it helped reinforce my own version of America First on this 250th birthday of America. My version has two parts. America needs to be first in corralling as many nations in the world as possible into a global coalition, a brotherhood, designed to ensure that we maximize the benefits and cushion the worst impacts of the great planetary scale challenges we now face together as a species, specifically managing artificial intelligence, climate change, human migration, nuclear, biological weapons, and pandemics, so that we rise together and we don't fall together. This is America as the first among equals. For all of America's failings, no other country possesses the same combination of military reach, technological innovation, financial depth, democratic tradition, and rule of law to convene others into a global coalition. But America needs to be first today in another way. We meet the First Nation to prove that we can take our founding motto, to forge out of many one, and make it work in a country where the many are so much more diverse than our original 13 colonies. What is required is nothing less than forging a continental scale, multiracial, genuinely equal democracy, unlike any history has seen before. The world has known vast, diverse empires, but it has never known a democracy this diverse, large, and deeply interconnected. If America can be the first to make it work, it can be a model and mentor of radical pluralism for the rest of the world, just as it was for democracy 250 years ago. Only such an America, one that can once again make out of many one, even as the many grew so much more complex, can credibly lead the world in the 21st century, because the world looks so much more like us today, and we look so much more like the world. So that is my version of America First, to crown our glory by cementing brotherhood at home and abroad, from sea to shining sea. Editorial comment. Of course, all these articles would be good, but that's pretty poignant. This is written by Jamel Bowie, Our Bravest Selves. The Trump administration announced the celebration of America's semi-quintessential with a tweet. Tonight, an official White House X account declared, last New Year's Eve, the illumination of America on the Washington Monument kicks off the celebration of America's 250th birthday. For the next week, visitors to the monument would see a projection mapping spectacle that aimed at the spectacle's organizers to narrate nation's discovery, expansion, independence, and vision for the future. The display showed images of settlers, soldiers, cowboys, astronauts, archetypical figures drawn from our national mythology. As deployed by this White House, each archetype emphasizes masculine conquest, national expansion, manifest destiny. It is freedom as the power to dominate others. But there are other freedoms in the American experience, and as we reflect on the 250th anniversary of the nation, as we think through the United States ideals and identity, we might look to an archetype that stands for something different, a figure in American history that was of great significance to our national story, but one that never quite found a place in our popular culture. That figure is the fugitive slave. For as long as there has been slavery in British North America and later the United States, there had been runaways, fugitives from the bondage who escaped to whatever sanctuary was available. As the cotton economy grew as a rapid clip through the 1820s into the 1830s, so too the slave economy. And as the number of enslaved people rose throughout the southern states, so too did the number of runaways. The 1840s and 50s saw a steady exodus of black Americans from Upper South states such as Virginia, Kentucky, and Maryland to free soil north of the Mason-Dixon line. Many thousands of people made the attempt, overcoming harsh terrain, vicious slave catchers, and the 1850 passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. The full weight of the federal government, which required states to return runaways under the threat of harsh punishment. In their determination to free themselves and their heightened awareness of fundamental importance of autonomy, agency, and individuality, and in the determination to realize for themselves and others a broad and egalitarian freedom, fugitive slaves embodied some of the nation's highest values. They stood as living examples of the best that Americans could be. They also stood and lived as a profound challenge to what the nation actually was. In stealing themselves from bondage, fugitives also brought fire and fury and critical knowledge to the anti-slavery cause. It is no coincidence that many of the most important abolitionists of the 1830s, 40s, and 50s were former slaves, including William Harriet Jacobs and, of course, Frederick Douglass. That the roster of former fugitives includes some of the most quintessentially American men and women ever to grace the country's history is indicative of why the fugitive slaves ought to share the stage as an archetypical American figure. We are living in a moment when our actions as a nation are far behind a feel what we claim to value. It is the best time then to reflect on a group of Americans who heightened the contradiction with their very selves. The next column is written by Michelle Goldberg, Our Refuge. In 1788, the year before he assumed the presidency, George Washington wrote a letter to the radical Dutch Mennonite minister Francis Adrian van der Kemp, welcoming him to the United States. I had always hoped that this land might become a safe and agreeable asylum to the virtuous and persecuted, part of mankind, to whatever nation they might belong. The nation of America as a refuge for the oppressed has waxed and waned over our country's history, and it has obviously never been absolute. Washington, concerned for the persecuted part of mankind, coexisted somehow with his ownership of slaves. But it still represents what is best about the U.S. The idea expressed in Washington's letter has to varying degrees been woven through Americans' culture since its inception, as much as some of the white nationalist Republican Party would like to deny it. The United States is, as John F. Kennedy put it, a nation of immigrants, and has often been better than any other country in the world as integrating newcomers and benefiting from their energy and talents. In Democracy in America, Alex de Tocqueville attributed America's democratic character to its immigrant makeup. It may be said that on leaving the mother country, the immigrants had in general no notion of superiority one over the other, he said. The happy and powerful do not go into exile, and there are no super guarantees of equality among men than poverty and misfortune. More than a half century later, Emma Lazarus' poem, The New Colossus, echoing the aspiration expressed in Washington's letter, was affixed to the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, welcoming the refugees and fortune seekers landing on America's shores. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe fire. There has, of course, always been a natives counter-reaction to the spirit of openness, one with its own long history. 10 years after Washington letter of Vander Kemp, John Adams signed the Alien Enemy Act, which gave the president's power to detain and deport non-citizens, and which remains in effect today. It's easy to tick through moments when America was seized by xenophobic hostility from the anti-Catholic know-nothings in the mid-19th century to Donald Trump today. But Trump's pinched and cruel conception of America shouldn't butt out the more generous and cosmopolitan ideas that have long been foundation to this nation. By the time I was being taught American history in school, Lazarus words had become part of America's civic religion. The catechism, which at times like a consensus faith, Republicans and Democrats alike were proud that anyone could become an American, and that almost the whole of humanity represented our country. We lead the world because unique among nations we draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world, said Ronald Reagan, and by doing so continuously renew and enrich our nation. Today, this vision is under siege by a president who dehumanizes immigrants in fascist terms and is building a nationwide network of squalid internment camps. But it's not dead. In 2025, New York City elected the latest in the successful of immigrant mayors. New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built for immigrants, powered by immigrants. And as of tonight, led by immigrant Zohan Madami, said in the victory speech, "It's the American way." Editorial comment. Each of these stories are fascinating. This was written by Jessica Gross. Our unflashy, unfussy competence. The health of American children has been declining for decades. We are losing more babies and children to gun violence and car accidents than we did 20 years ago. Children in the United States are far more likely to die than children in our peer nations. From 2007 to 2023, rates of 15 chronic health problems from obesity to seizure disorders increased significantly. Our current leaders seem hell-bent on dismantling any institution that safeguards public health, when what we need is a robust mission focused on the well-being of our country's children. Thankfully, we have a growing historical example to emulate in the Children's Bureau, a federal organization dedicated to the welfare of children that was spun up in the turn of the 20th century. The progressive reformers Lillian Wald and Florence Kelly came up with the germ of an idea, an organization that would research and help improve the health and virtue of children. In 1903, and it brought to President Roosevelt, Congress eventually passed a law creating the Children's Bureau in 1912. The statute granted the Bureau 15 employees and an operating budget of $25,000 per year. Julia Lathrop was appointed as chief, making her the first woman to lead a federal bureau. With a small budget and a scrappy staff, Lathrop realized that the bureau would be most effective, but most of any just a few issues, and so began studying infant mortality and the health of pregnant women. Until the Bureau was established, no one knew accurately how many babies were born in the course of a year, how many died, or why they died. The Social Service Review declared in 1932. We taught to think of our government as sluggish and bureaucracy as useless. But Lathrop's Children's Bureau was nimble and effective. The field studies on infant mortality that she led inspired legislation, funded state programs for moms and baby states, and the money to create public health clinics, educated midwives, and pay nurses to visit new and expecting moms, all of which resulted in an estimated 9% to 21% decrease in infant mortality. The Bureau published plain-spoken guides to prenatal care and pregnancy and gave women up-to-date medical advice, and it helped to institute birth registration laws. I despair thinking about how much action-able formation we have lost and will never get back because of the sizable budget cuts to children's health and education research. But the fact that Lathrop and her colleagues can move quickly to study and protect the most vulnerable is inspiring, and we should recover that spirit if we can improve the scientific foundation of children's health before there was even a telephone to the Oval Office. We can do it now with so many tools at our disposal. Next article is written by Tressie McMillan Cotton, and the headline is An Island of Democracy. An Island of Democratic Possibility. America did not invent libraries, that was the Assyrians, but when the Peterborough Town Library in New Hampshire was established in 1833, was the first public lending library continuously funded by public money. A 1900 write-up about the nation's first literary palace for the people is a moving, simple elocution of radical, complex ideas that can hold its own along the Declaration of Independence. The grand idea of the library, an institution worthy of maintenance by public tax, owned and managed by the people, who thereby caused to be mendicants to private munificence and taste. When I was 7 years old, my library card was my first credential. It was proof that I existed, and that card meant the freedom to choose what I would read. By extension, it was a taste of autonomy. At the time, the library put a kid on par with an adult. Thrilling stuff was also made equal of women and men, of immigrants, citizens, of the property, and the unhoused. Today, public library still calls power to account by presenting with the luxury of knowing our own minds. This in a world where algorithms flutter out individuality while flattening our taste in one big blob of memes and cheap cashmere sweaters and viral hot takes. Where but the library? Frequently asked my students. Can you linger without buying something first? There are apps to find a bathroom. Won't cost a cup of coffee first. Drugstores lock up baby formula. The grocery store requires a cell phone number for a discount on pork chops. Everywhere else in our fragmented worlds, we are reduced to transactions. Meanwhile, the library will hand a stack of books, carpet cleaner, and a stack of seeds without collateral. Public libraries are tangible proof of inalienable truths that we have forgotten in our 250 years. Some things are more important than profit. There is a macabre joke that if you propose the concept of a publicly funded library to Americans today, partisans would call it woke. The truth is that the library has been an island of democratic possibility during every era of American struggle. Ursula K. Le Guin once wrote, "We live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable, so does the divine right of kings. The power of what is can't foreclose on what might be. The public library, paid for by the people, for the cultural endowment of the people, was a window into which was possible." Library was not and is not perfect. Our public library system has been segregated and elitist. At various points in history, public libraries have reinforced white superiority, excluded sexual minorities, and elevated men as knowledge gatekeepers. And only rarely does it receive consistent, secure funding to fill its many societal roles. But however imperfect, whatever a public library exists as one of the few places where Americans can experience the public life that neoliberalism has defunded and partisanship has demonized. When you walk into one, you know that there are some things too precious to be trusted to corporations or consumer preference or political influence. A library card is liberal democracy made manifest. There's a reason that culture warriors hate the library. It is the same reason that Americans should defend it with their lives. No political spin doctor can sell us what is freely given at one, the right to think for ourselves. The next article is written by Frank Bruni. Aren't perfect. In his 2003 State of the Union address, President George Bush focused on the case that he was building for invading Iraq and the enormous stake of that gamble, and its potential for disaster were clear even then. But in that same speech, Bush made a less attending getting pitched for a much different foreign adventure, one that would turn out to be as noble as Iraq was shameful. He announced the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, or PEPFAR, and his determination to devote $15 billion over the next 5 years to fighting the disease in the African and Caribbean nations that were hardest hit by it. I remember being stunned and moved. I wasn't alone. I damn near drove off the road, said Sandra Thurman, who had been the director of the White House Office of National AIDS Policy and in the Clinton administration. Ms. Thurman was talking to Benjamin Ryan of NBC News, explaining that she had been in her car when she heard Bush's proposal. It took my breath away, made me cry tears of joy and gratitude. That's because AIDS funding has never been an easy sell. The disease was associated with the kind of people, gay or black, or destitute or drug addicted, who are so often neglected or reviled. And here was a Republican president calling for lavish spending on AIDS in poor countries, where America wasn't looking for military support or other reciprocal favors. There are cynical explanations. National security officials fear that the grimly rising toll of AIDS-related death in those places would be established in a way that threatened America. Religious conservatives, who were an integral part of Bush's base, had warmed to the idea of Christian clarity on this scale, and Bush was flexing a big-heartedness and big-mindedness that were helpful in peddling the Iraq War. Similarly, the implementation of PEPFAR, editorial comment, I've never heard of that and I don't know what that is, was imperfect in part because those conservatives insisted on elements such as abstinence education and were driven more by ideology than practicability. But they were very compromised on an integral part of Americans' democracy. They did nothing to take away from the fact that Bush's $15 billion ask was much larger than his advisors initially recommended and thought possible, that PEPFAR was bipartisan supported in Congress, and it was signed into law just 5 months after Bush's speech. And it has endured for 23 years, although it's currently diminished and in danger, and that it has directed more than $100 billion toward HIV/AIDS relief, sharply reducing rates of infection and death. By the most widely accepted estimates, more than 25 million lives have been saved. That's worth repeating. By most widely accepted estimate, more than 25 million lives have been saved. That's not facile symbolism or political gamesmanship. That's mercy. That's generosity. In his 2003 remarks, Bush cited the increased effectiveness and decreased cost of drugs and treatment and prevention of AIDS, and to proclaim, seldom has history offered a greater opportunity to do so much for so many. That he and members of Congress seize the moment speaks to the conviction with many Americans, too often obscured but never extinguished, that a country's greatness is measured by the good that it's willing to do. The next article was written by John McWhorter. Our strutting. Americans could reasonably surpass that just as other countries have their own cuisines and film industries. India's Bollywood to our Hollywood, they also have a thriving culture and musical theater equivalent to ours. This is not true. Musical theater, in the same sense of using vernacular music and language to tell the story on stage, is an American cultural staple. I mean, of course, musicals, not operas, nothing fusional. Excuse me, readers, that's another new word. Fusional, fusional. The musical that a coterie of fans embrace as a coming-of-age ritual and a source of social bonding, but the songs aren't just a background or interlude, but actually help to tell the story itself in place of spoken words. The kind where legions of people wear out the recordings the way others do Taylor Swift albums, of which schools do their own production for decades afterward. When Hairspray ends with the whole cast united in a Motown-affected song, You Can't Stop the Beat, and a dance move inviting an audience to move along with them, followed by an explosion of confetti, when in the first 2 weeks of the staged Aspiration of Grey Gardens, the audience is full of theater folks on the edge of their seats, and a song by the kooky but earnest Little Eddie Beagle gets so much applause that you know that in the old days it would have gotten an encore. When Bette Midler doing the title number Hello Dolly drives the audience so crazy that you understand what the expression "it blew the roof off" means. A uniquely dynamic and attractive form of theater music happened in America. 3 ingredients were necessary. First, an established tradition of music making derived from Europe, marches, waltzes, ballads, jigs. Second, a descendants of African enslaved people transforming this music with the polyrhythms and blue note shadings derived from their places of origin. Third, a burgeoning commercial music industry by the 1880s prepared to air its new music, make it a nationwide and soon international sensation, and thus generations of composers and lyricists into competition with one another to excel in the form and pushed it artistically forward. As the musical show lighting up Broadway has at first, the people called it ragtime, but this evolved into early jazz, one of the fates of which was to become the language of the American narrative musical. Broadway music came to strut, flash jam, became electric. It made the scores of substantial musicals more interesting than anything happening on the popular musical stage anywhere else. When European imported our shows, the result was game, but missing the certain something in performance as well as the orchestral snap. A French version of No, No, Nanette in the 20s was rather than spicy. When people also created their own musical, it was the same as if they were imitating something rather than inhabiting it. In an Austrian musical 1937, an up little duet of seduction called With Piano Accompaniment sounded about as sexy as the title making me yearn for Cheek to Cheek. Plenty of countries import our musicals and translate them, but they can create many fewer of their own, and they don't get to us. Obviously, some musicals have succeeded, but Andrew Lloyd Webber openly drew from the American musical well. And as for the majestic Euro pop of Les Miserables, one must wield comparisons carefully if asked which musical genre is more historical awesome. Or as in Cathedral of Notre Dame awesome, I would have to choose the language that our own Cole Porter, Kiss Me Kate, Maury Yesson, Titanic, and David Yaspic, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, have worked wonders with. One of the most special things that have happened in America is the emergence of Broadway electricity, an unexpected byproduct of the tragedy of the slave trade. Here's a kind of music making that channels ordinary speech and commercial songs into a form so uplifting that fans often consider going to a good musical as a kind of church, or at least I do. The whole world stands in line for it. It could only have happened here. Next article is written by Carlos Lozada, A Beautiful and Bittersweet Ritual. I peeped into the Grand Canyon, ferried to the Statue of Liberty, survived the 4th of July throngs in the National Mall, but none of these experiences came as close to stirring my affection for America, to capturing what I appreciate about the place as a day nearly 12 years ago I attended a U.S. naturalization ceremony. Granted, it was my own naturalization, so I'm biased about the significance. Standing in a federal building in Baltimore, November 24th, surrounded by people from all over the planet, by a multiplicity of language and views, by a sense of anticipation of the culmination of an arduous journey, may have been the most American moment of my life. During his final public remarks as President of the United States, the day before he departed office, Ronald Reagan reflected on the country's unique embrace. You can go live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman, he said. You can go to live in Germany or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become a German, a Turk, or a Japanese. But anyone from any country of the earth can come to live in America and become an American. Editorial comment, that's pretty profound. America does not always welcome newcomers, but our national immigrants' tradition coexists with a tradition of suspicion, rejection, even violence. No matter how much America may need us, it often does not want us. Those of us who arrive from somewhere else, whether as children or adults, who speak or look or pray or eat in their own way, live that tension every day. But at a naturalization ceremony, the contradictions melt away, even for just a moment. The tension between to dissipate in that room. A small group of us, new Americans from any country of the earth, were formally assured that we were indeed welcome here. This is our home. We belong. That day, Reagan's promise came alive in a letter we each received from another president. You represent the promise of American dream, Barack Obama wrote on White House letterhead. And because of your determination, this great nation is now your nation. The President urged our engaged participation in our communities and reminded us the sacrifice in behalf of our future generations is the price and the promise of citizenship. In their letters to new citizens, presidents emphasized varying aspects of the American story. George W. Bush lingered on the founding generation, their duty of public service. Bill Clinton called on new citizens to safeguard our liberties. George W. Bush emphasized that Americans are bound not by blood, not by birth or soil, but by principle. Joe Biden stressed the courage of the immigrant journey and the power of the American idea. Now, President Trump's letter highlights assimilation and allegiance, heritage, and devotion. Among the thousands of naturalization ceremonies each year in courthouses and federal buildings across the country, many feature the call of countries when officials read aloud all the national origins represented among the new citizens. It's a beautiful and bittersweet ritual. During my ceremony, one country was inadvertently skipped, and the people who hailed from there protested loudly. They wanted an old place to remember, even as they embraced the new one. It was an understandable reaction, a perfectly American one. I recall the love and pride I felt when Peru was named. Love for my birthplace, and pride in everyone knowing that it too had heard the call of America. An editorial comment. When I first retired, I was teaching a course in citizenship at International Institute. My mission was to help the people pass the citizenship exam. On 2 occasions, my wife and I were invited to the ceremony where they were inducted as citizens. And as Carlos states, it truly was very, very moving. And one was in a courthouse, and the other was one on the ships down by Canal Side. Next article is written by Ross Douthat. Our games. In a land of a million inventions, there's no better evidence of America's creative spark than our creation of not one, but 3 extraordinary sports in the lifespan of a single human being. Baseball officially appeared on the Elysian Fields, where else, in New Jersey, in 1846, though its exact origins are destined to be eternally contested. Football crystallized in 1880 when Walt Camp helped establish the line of scrimmage and the snap to the quarterback. And basketball that sprang forth suddenly in 1891 when James Naismith hung up 2 peach baskets in a gym in Springfield, Mass. Famous civilizations are often remembered for their games. Gladiatorial contests and chariot racing define the life of ancient Rome. Soccer and cricket spread with the British Empire. Rubber ball games parade pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The formalization of national sports is often part of nation building. Australian rules football, Gaelic football, and hockey each took shape, with Australian, Irish, and Canadian manhood. But America's baseball, football, basketball trinity is a unique achievement. Our sports bridge the 4 seasons, spring to fall for the diamond, summer to winter for the gridiron, fall to spring for the gym. Baseball is pastoral, basketball urban, football a natural anchor for suburban sprawl. They are engines of assimilation and zones of racial integration, even as each one's specific composition and constituency change. Each rewards distinct skills and physiques, bridged by the occasional Bo Jackson, but with types that are still almost instantly identifiable. If you stand a shortstop next to the linebacker, next to a power forward. These differences create inevitable hierarchies depending on the fan. My owner loves goes baseball, football, basketball because of the national pastimes intimidations of eternity, sometimes to a fault, which is why the pitch clock became necessary. The way baseball culture lets the poet's heart do battle with the statistician's head. But the range of the 3 great games offers something to every kind of mind. The military historian admiring the battle plans of the NFL, head coaches, the physicists, and the physiologists marveling at basketball's midair ballet. The international spread of these sports has mapped the natural limits of our informal empire. Baseball reaching into Latin America and East Asia, basketball thriving in the Pacific Rim and Europe, both hitting limits in the South Asian cricket belt. Meanwhile, football is more parochial, more powerful, maintaining a privileged position as a last denying domestic spectacle, a litmus test of Americanness, a great game that somehow is ours alone. One useful question for any great civilization is what will survive us when we are gone? It might be the names of Washington or Jefferson, might be Lincoln's second inaugural address, or Martin Luther King's Jr., I Have a Dream, or it might be Moby Dick or The Godfather, the Coke can, or Golden Arches. But I can see a distant future where a would-be successor to American revives the Super Bowl, as modern Europeans revive the Olympics of ancient Greece, where basketball is played in Air Jordans built for Martians' gravity, or where baseball diamonds survive like Roman roads, overgrown but legible enough for some far distant inheritor to shout in the tongue of the fourth millennium, "Play ball!" Now, there's one more sport we have to add. It's not so much American, it's typical world, but it's soccer. And since we're having the World Soccer Championships in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, so for our generation, the three sports, but probably in the next 10 years, soccer. At the moment, soccer is the world's biggest attendance right now, but it'll get bigger in the United States. Next article is written by David French. Our longest of 8. If you wanted to introduce people to the highest American ideals, what would you point them to? The great document of American founding are an obvious answer. Read the Declaration of Independence. Read the Constitution. If you want to extend the second founding and the end of slavery and the advent of equal protection by the laws, read the Gettysburg Address. Read Lincoln's second inaugural address. Read the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But with every passing year, I think there's a better answer. Read the founding debate. Read the Federalist Papers, the essay so famously drafted by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay in defense of the Constitution. But you should also read the Anti-Federalist Papers, the other side of the debate. There were founders who had concerns about the Constitution, many of which have been vindicated by history. The founding document answered the question, what is America? It is the founding debate that answers a different question. Why? Why is America built like it is? The founding debate provides the moral and philosophical bedrock for America, and is against the bedrock that the health of a republic should be measured. The founders are beginning from something that looked like a blank slate, trying as much as they could within their context to imagine what a nation could be, federalist and anti-federalist alike, wanted a republican form of government. They rejected the idea that power should be concentrated under a single leader. They had a deep fear of tyranny and despotism. They appreciated the need for civic virtue. The debates about how best to create the republic could even be prophetic, predicting the very crisis we face today. Their worries are our worries. Consider, for example, the debate over the pardon power at the Virginia Ratification Convention 1788. George Mason objected to the broad pardon power granted to the president. Now I conceive that the president ought not to have the power of pardoning, because he may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself. This statement, once perhaps considered fanciful, has loud echoes in President Trump's decision to grant clemency to the men and women who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Or consider the extent to which the founders worried about a president without virtue. In the same ratification debate, Mason argues so disinterested and amiable a character as George Washington might never command again. The possibility of danger ought to be guarded against. Madison, the likely author of Federalist Number 51, would agree. In that seminal paper, he wrote, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external or internal controls on government would be necessary. There are principles that the Constitution was supposed to safeguard. And if the Constitution fails, then we know exactly where to look to find the answer to the competing ideas of the American founding. Are you worried that the president is too powerful? The founding debate has the answer. Cato, a pseudonym described many historians as George Clinton, who was then the governor of New York, pointed at the first sentence of Article 2. The construction of the first paragraph of the first section of the second article, we wrote, is vague and inexplicable. The paragraph contains a sentence: the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. What is executive power? That undefined phrase has vexed politicians and courts more than 2 centuries. The founding debate helps us answer those questions, but does something arguably even more important. It reminds us of the moral and philosophical foundation of a republic. We can understand our highest ideals. It is the founding debate that we understand they are supposed to be. Next article is written by David Wells. Our boundless ambition. 1 billion. That's credible estimate of the number of lives saved by the Midwestern agronomist Norman Borlaug. Working in relative scientific anonymity in the 50s, he began to develop new varieties of super wheat that yielded much more food than older strains and helped distribute them. Borlaug's bundle of innovations came to be called the Green Revolution and changed the course of American history, although 1 billion is a suspiciously large and suspiciously round number. 7 times as many lives were estimated to have been saved by the global vaccinations over the last century. It's hard not to see Borlaug's impact on world history. In India and Pakistan, where crop failures and famines came regularly enough to produce widespread panic about mass starvation, wheat yields nearly doubled in just 5 years. By the time they had 1970, Borlaug had already won the Nobel Peace Prize. This was written by Maureen Dowd. Our aspiration to fairness. When I was growing up, if anyone broke a glass in our house, my mom would carefully wrap up the shards and put them out the trash to collectors. I don't want them to cut their hands, she would say. If you broke a glass, it was only fair that you made sure the sharp edges didn't hurt anyone. When I complained once about a lot of ads on TV we were watching, she told me I wasn't being fair. Advertisers pay for the show. They have a right to be heard. Later, when she was living in an apartment building on crutches, she delivered meals to the men and women working in the building on Christmas. It was only fair, she said, since they couldn't be with their families. In the 90s, contrasts that pitted Hillary Clinton against Monica Lewinsky, my mom chose both. She said they were both very smart and pretty and had a lot to offer. That was a fair way to look at it, she said. She also still had a soft spot for Bill. My dad was the same. When our neighbor in a Maryland beach town fell on hard times, my dad went down to the bank and co-signed the man's mortgage without saying a word to anyone. It was only fair. The neighbor not only paid his debt. When my dad died, the man drove to D.C. and waited in a line for an hour in the freezing cold to get to the wake so he could tell my mom what my dad had secretly done. When the Ku Klux Klan burned crosses on the lawn of other beach neighbors, the only Jewish family in town, my dad trucked down the local Klan leader and told him to back off, or else my dad, a police detective, made sure the Klansman saw his service revolver on his waist. My dad was in charge of the U.S. Senate security. He judged politicians not only on their ideology, but also on how they treated people. Were they nasty to the elevator operator and Capitol police officers and cafeteria workers? That wasn't fair. My parents did not think they behaved in and out of the ordinary way. They considered fairness a very American trait, like their fierce patriotism. Our clothes, napkins, and candles always had to be red, white, and blue on July 4th. Because of my parents, I always thought of fairness as an American trait as well. My dad was an Irish immigrant, and my mom's parents were Irish immigrants, and they built their working class dreams life here. America was fair to them, and they wanted to be fair to everyone else. My family believed in government for all its flaws as a protector of people. My first cousin, Peggy Dowd, was the secretary for FDR's aide, Tommy Corcoran, primary strategist of the New Deal. After 10 years of working together, they married and started a family. The social safety net created jobs for millions of people and helped pull the country out of Great Depression. People treated public goods as public goods instead of money-making opportunities for the well-connected few. For decades until President Trump, the government was trusted to protect food, water, the climate, and disadvantaged. It wasn't about which party who were in. President Richard Nixon signed the National Environmental Policy Act and endangered species. Of course, we have at times fallen spectacularly short of that ideal in our nation's history, including the original sin of slavery, the Allen Sedition Act, segregation and internment of Japanese American citizens during World War II. But I always thought that most Americans sought to be fair. The country was founded on an inspirational goal. All men are created equal. Yet lately, so much seems unfair. The failed shooting of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, the Trump family's kleptocracy, and the blatant grifting reported so brilliantly by the Times-Herald and a team of reporters in the Pulitzer Prize investigation, the racism and anti-Semitism that have reared up in raw and ugly ways, Jeff Bezos' decimation of a legendary newspaper, the Washington Post, aiming to please the thin-skinned president, and David Ellison's decimation of the legendary news division at CBS, aiming to please a corrupt FCC chair who's kissing the ring of a thin-skinned president who yearns to be king. Trump and his congressional cronies cutting critical safety net programs and handing out big tax breaks to billionaire buddies, the cutting of the landmark voting acts, and the wrong-headed view of the conservative Supreme Court majority that racism is over in America. The obscene pay of CEOs growing 20 times as fast as worker, and the obscene wealth in the tech world with money cascading in the hands of greedy billionaires who lack empathy and even noblesse oblige. The uber-rich Rahm Emanuel, I call it the 3-2-1. They're going to be the third house, the second wife, and the first plane. They're in a hermetically sealed world. Trump taking the country to war with Iran, and part of the urging was pal Bibi, without any sensible plan, debate, sanction from Congress, or consideration to how that might hurt Americans already struggling to make meat. Trump gleefully tearing up large chunks of the White House in my hometown, trying to install a sophistic arch, an exclusive ghost court, like a Garchon ballroom in the Garden of Heroes, all to his Versailles asset specifications. He desecrated the Kennedy Center, slapping his name on it and meddling with its artistic content, until a judge ordered the name stripped off. The president is ripping him out the scenes of my happiest child, the modest, beautiful White House, Jackie Kennedy's gardens, the golf course at Hands Point where I used to go with my older brother. The stunning failure of the hacks in government and the lords of the cloud to figure out how to regulate artificial intelligence, create a kill switch to save humanity, even as AI leaps forward into superintelligence and sooner than we may think consciousness. I tried to infuse my life with my parents' sense of fairness, and I continue to believe or hope that most Americans are fair, despite the unholy din of social media malice and Trump nastiness, and despite all that's stacked against us. It's unfair to even have to wonder, are Americans still fair?
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,